morning, everybody. Morning, Anne, Kent, Sonia, Casey. A few people jumping on already. I might just wait a minute and just let some other people join us, and then we will get started. If you just want to let me know that you're hearing me all good, just in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen there.
I don't see that. Chat.
That's okay.
Oh, here.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you. All right, let's get started. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar this morning. We are recording this session, so we will send out the link to members in the next couple of days. So just in case you do need to skip out on any part of it, you will get a copy of this following the webinar. My name is Summer, and I'm one of the Member Services and Communications Coordinators for MPAQ, and today I'll be moderating the session. So today's session, we're going to be speaking specifically about the implications of COVID-19 on contract clauses, insurances, debt collection, all of that kind of thing. We'll be speaking with Ian Heathwood, who is a partner at Cornwalls Law, and Steve Hamill, the Managing Director of Comsure Insurance Brokers. We are going to do things a little bit differently than what we normally do. We don't have a presentation or anything like that. We're just going to get straight into a Q&A with Ian and Steve. We've got a few pre-prepared questions. Obviously, we also welcome any questions from you guys that are watching this, whether you're watching it live or you're watching the recording. Obviously, if you're watching the recording, we can't answer the questions live, but you can still send those through and we can get answers for you. So any questions you've got, just submit those into the chat on the right-hand side of the screen there. As always, you can choose to make your response viewable by everybody or just by the admin, which is just me. So you can do that down the bottom of the screen there if you do want to make your messages private. So I'm going to now get rid of this slide. So good morning, Ian. Good morning, Steve. How are you both today?
Good morning, Summer. Very good, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Steve, how are you going? Can you hear us all good?
Good morning.
Oh, there we go. Awesome. And Penny's here with us as well. So if you do have any questions for Penny, obviously feel free to bring those in. So good morning, Penny.
Good morning, Summer. Good morning, Ian and Steve and everybody else for joining us this morning.
So the first question we've got is for Ian. So Ian, Cornwalls, they're experts in building contractual relationships. What have you seen so far in the industry with the impact of COVID-19?
I suspect, like many of you members out there, we've seen it's a bit of a patchwork. Generally speaking, we're seeing a lot more what I'd call quietness than normal. There are some clients who seem to be very, very busy, particularly those on very big projects. But generally with the mid-tier to smaller guys, we're seeing them be pretty quiet, and we're not getting much in the way of inquiries. That we normally get, a dozen calls a day from people asking questions as part of the free service that we have for MPAQ members. We've had probably 8, maybe 10 since the Prime Minister's announcement. People just aren't calling at the moment, which is concerning, obviously, as a legal practitioner. But I'm hoping that's indicative that people aren't having problems. We're obviously talking to clients and seeing that they're changing their work patterns, obviously, on site. And I've had a couple of chats with some people about how difficult that is, particularly on the really big projects. We're on level 33 and people go up and down the lift thing, which they can't put 20 people in anymore. We're not seeing any clients saying, hey, I've been given a new contract. which is concerning for everybody. For those of you who have the misfortune of being in QCAT or a court, you will have got a notification saying that everything's been adjourned to a date to be fixed. So the courts came to a stop. They've been turning that around now lately, and they're saying, okay, now you can, if you want to be listed and get on, let us know. So it's sort of firing up again. Obviously, there are clients ringing us about rent relief. I've done a bit of work around that. That's not that easy unless you've got a job with the government or so, at least with the government. Everybody is starting to, all the lawyers are starting to, including us, starting to draft COVID-19 clauses, which we could talk about a bit later. We haven't seen much in the way of liquidated damages being imposed on people yet, but that's one of the big areas of risk that we're really worried about. We've seen people being concerned to make sure they get the right contract. There's builders and owners who are swapping using even nastier contracts than normal. So that's the sort of thing we're seeing at the moment, Summer.
And I know you just mentioned some of them, but are there any other issues that you see escalating down the track?
Yeah, unfortunately, depends how long this all goes for, and no one knows, but the longer it goes, the greater the risk that we're going to see fairly significant solvency issues and people not being able to comply with their MFRs. And that's a major concern to everybody in the industry. And unless the government actually legislates, which they are talking about, to do something about liquidated damages, I think you're going to see a lot of problems there. So I think they're the main things we're seeing as likely to escalate and cause problems. And it's just going to become even more important than normal to make sure you know it's in your contract, that you follow the procedures, that if you don't know, you ask questions, and don't sign contracts with crappy clauses. So all that, it's just all more important than normal because the risks are higher, as Steve will talk about with the insurance stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I suppose speaking of Steve, so Steve, we might just get a bit of an update from you. So what have you seen that's been the general response from the insurance industry relating to COVID-19?
Thanks, Summer. I actually lost sound when Ian was talking. I'm sorry, so I didn't really hear what.
Lucky man.
But I get the gist of what's been happening. The insurance industry is a little bit different to the banking industry in that the banks can actually provide extensions on loans because they've got security over bricks and mortar over multi-year loans. The insurance contracts are only over 12 months, so there's a bit of limited flexibility that the insurers can provide. But we have, and a lot of other brokers and insurers have been talking with the ACCC, and on the 1st of April, we lodged an expression with the ACCC to try and provide some assistance to consumers. And we today received a response back from the ACCC to say that they are entertaining the idea that the likes of Suncorp, Allianz, QBE, and a number of brokers around Australia can enter into or provide submissions to the ACCC about what relief can be provided. The only thing that I have as far as some reservations about this is the timeline involved. We lodged this with the ACCC on the 1st of April. It's now the end of April that they've said that, yes, they'll enter into it. The process from here is we have to provide submissions in May, which will then be heard in June. A draft determination will be put forward by the ACCC in July. There'll be public consultation on that in July, and with the final determination in September. So by the time this all rolls around, I think that the restrictions hopefully shall be lifted and we'll be back up into operation. The other thing that's happening with the insurance industry is market conditions. We've been in a hardening environment in rates, in increasing in rates for the last 18 months. This is just forcing non-profitable lines of business into extreme territory with pricing increases, excess increases, and also restrictions in cover. An example of that was in the Fin Review yesterday. There was an article with engineers, building certifiers, and other construction industry bodies that are hit by the increases in premiums, reductions in cover. There was one particular engineer who was saying that he's now paying 4 times more for his insurance for 20 times less cover than he was just 2 years ago. And I'm sure that has some implications that Ian will probably go into later with some of the contract obligations. But in general terms, the insurance cover for pandemic does not exist worldwide unless there is some form of infectious disease or incident that happens at the nominated insured location. And we do see this type of extension particularly relevant in the hospitality industry, where you may have a murder, a death, or a suicide, or some sort of event like that at a premises, that the insurer would see this as no different to a material damage claim, such as a storm or a fire. But it only is at that nominated location, and it has to be a downturn in the turnover as a direct result of that incident. But we're hopeful that the restrictions will ease and there won't be too much of an impost going forward.
Yeah, just Steve, if I could just pop in there, you're talking about pandemic not being covered by insurance. It's also generally not covered by contracts. I think most of the members listening would know what a force majeure clause is, but if anyone doesn't, force majeure clause is a clause in the contract which says, look, if an event which is totally beyond everybody's control occurs, which prevents people from performing the contract, such as, you know, what typically we'd call an act of God, then people can be relieved of their contractual obligation and everything sort of stops and there's no liquidated damages, there's no problems on time and all that sort of stuff. So that's what, if there's an act of God. Now, when I've been practicing 35 years, when I was first practicing, I can remember seeing force majeure clauses that had words like pandemic and endemic, epidemic in there as a ground of force majeure, because they nearly all contain a definition of what force majeure means for that contract. But I haven't seen that for ages. And funny enough, Penny, I was just looking at the standard MPAQ contracts we did for you guys a while ago, in which you sell to your members, and we don't have it in there either, so we'll have to go and amend that. So lawyers are running around trying to include it, but generally speaking, like insurance, as Steve's saying, an epidemic or pandemic or what's going on with this COVID-19 thing is not going to constitute an act of force majeure, which lets you off your contractual obligation. So, you know, the time is still running, time is still of the essence, as they say, so it's going to be a problem. Just associated with that is another concept which I should probably explain to the members, and that is the concept of frustration. And if I just one last thing on that force majeure, you need to read your contracts and check and see what it actually says, because you just might be lucky and it's in there. But if you don't have it in the contract, you can't imply force majeure as like common law. It just doesn't exist. If it's not in the contract, you don't get it. So another good reason why you should always have a proper contract. And associated with all that is the concept of what we call frustration. And this is doesn't have to be in the contract, but contracts would normally deal with it. And that is where you are frustrated in performing the contract by a particular thing. And again, that comes back to what the contract actually says. But ultimately, if the contract's completely frustrated and it's not covered by force majeure, like epidemic's not a force majeure, but the whole site comes to a stop and it's totally time critical, then the contract might be frustrated and that might give you a right to terminate the contract. But terminating for frustration is really tricky stuff, and you can end up worse off than you are. So, my advice is just this. If you've got significant problems on a job, give us a call and have a chat about it and see what we may or may not be able to suggest, which could help. Actually, I've forgotten now what you're asking me directly there, Summer.
That's okay. Yeah, we did have
liquidated damages, I think.
Yeah, we were going to cover off on liquidated damages. We were going to ask about force majeure a little bit later, but that's okay.
Oh, okay.
It's all right if you've already answered it. That's fine. So just going back a little bit to liquidated damages. So it's obviously an emerging issue. What's likely to happen should the government not intervene on this one?
Well, perhaps I could start off by explaining what the associations, including MPAQ, are encouraging the government to actually do. So, and in this respect, I've got to say, master builders have actually been really good. I don't normally say that about them, but they have, and they've sort of led the charge to try and do something about this, probably because they see their members are going to be in as much poo as our members potentially. But the general schema of most contracts, of course, is that you have a date for practical completion, which is when you're supposed to finish the job. Sometimes that gets extended by various extensions of time, etc. And if you don't finish within that time, the contract usually provides what's called a liquidated damages to be applied, which is a penalty, which is supposed to be the genuine pre-estimate made by the parties before they enter the contract of how much loss and damage the person above you is likely to suffer. Now, often we don't see that. We see them stupid numbers that they put in there. But in any event, so then if you're late, they will say, well, that's $5,000 a day. And you can get absolutely clobbered, especially if it goes on for a long time. I've done advices on big contracts in civil, particularly where the liquidated damages are several $100,000 a day, so it can get pretty nasty. But what master builders, master plumbers, and so on are trying to push the government to do is this: amend the Australian Competition and Consumer Act, which we used to call the Trade Practices Act in the old days, to include among the unfair contract provisions in there a clause which basically defines what a agreed COVID-19 delay is. And basically the attempt is to define, if you're stuck at some stage and there is a delay because of the COVID-19 problem, then it's illegal for someone in the contractual chain to impose liquidated damages on someone for that reason. So that would be very helpful, particularly if you're a plumber. The second part of that is that they also then say, right, everybody in the contractual chain right down gets an extension of time for however long that COVID-19 delay is, which is very helpful. And that's a really good idea. There are two limitations with it, as I see them, which I gave some advice to Penny about. The first is that they're only saying they're going to do this for contracts, or the general thrust is to do it for contracts which were entered into before, I think it's the 4th of March, when the Prime Minister gave his address. The theory behind that is that if you've entered into a contract since all this nonsense started, supposedly you had an opportunity to negotiate proper terms and conditions in your contract. But I can tell you that just didn't happen, and it's still not really happening. So that's a serious limitation. I can't see why we couldn't just do it for all contracts for the time being. The second limitation is that the feds can only pass laws about things that are in the Constitution. And for the unfair contracts stuff, and for this, they would be using what's called the corporation's power. That is a power to make laws about companies. But of course, that's fine if you're a company, but not every business is a company. There's a number of you out there who are sole traders. There's a number of you out there who are partnerships or partnerships of trusts. Not that likely if you've got a QBCC license, but in other spheres you see it, partnerships of trusts where the trustees are not companies but individuals. None of them would gain the protection of what is being proposed at the moment. However, the states and territories can all make laws about that. So the solution needs to be, yes, the feds need to do something, but so do each of the states and territories. So there's reciprocal backup legislation, so it covers everybody. So that's what's being pushed to the government. I don't know how the government's entertaining that. Penny would be better placed probably to know what governments are thinking on this.
Sorry, it might help if I turn the microphone on. Yes, we have, Master Builders did raise this matter with us direct, and obviously we have put in a response back to Master Builders. We're working closely with them and some of the other subcontractor associations to be able to formalise a response back to government here from a state level, but also from a federal level as well. So as soon as we have more information, we'll be able to let members know on how that's progressing.
Yeah, I think it'd be really good. And then the sort of, I think you asked me what happens if the government doesn't do anything. Well, the answer to that's going to be a truckload more liquidated damages problems, extensions of time problems, just contractual mess and solvency issues ultimately, which is just too awful to contemplate. But it all depends how long this goes for.
Yeah, definitely. Steve, we might jump over to you. So is it likely that some of the general insurance policies, such as management liability, held by the average contractor, might assist for issues arising out of the virus? Can we hear him speaking?
No.
No.
Can't hear you, Steve.
Steve can't hear you.
Sure, it's really good, people.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely giving us a lot of information.
Steve, can't hear you. No noise. Microphone. No, you're silent.
Might send him a text message and let him know.
Just while we're waiting on Steve so we can get the sound back up, I just wanted to reiterate in terms of what Ian was saying before, if you do have a question or query, we do have a member benefit with Cornwalls solicitors where members can call up and talk to somebody there for approximately 15-20 minutes at no cost. So it is something that's included as part of your membership benefit with Master Plumbers.
Steve, can you hear us? We can't hear you at the moment. Okay.
Do you have another question for Ian Summer? And I'll message Steve.
Yeah.
Maybe ring him on the mobile.
Yeah, good idea. Yes, Ian. I suppose so. Do you have? I think you sent me some information already, but do you have any other tips for the members who are presented with a new contract, particularly given the current situation?
Well, I think it's more important now than normal to not just accept a contract and take it and and run with it. I know the temptation will be there because people will be looking for new jobs, but and there's not very many of them out there at the moment from what I'm seeing. I'm seeing contracts being pushed back, even ones which have been awarded. Like my neighbour across the road is a mid-tier builder, and he's had a number of jobs awarded by Cath-Ed and by whatever the Christian Brothers call themselves now, and they've just said, sorry, I know you've got the contract, but we're just not going ahead at the moment. And of course, being very good clients, he can't tell them to nick off. But the main thing is when you get a contract now, you're going to be needing to check all of the things that you should normally be checking, but particular focus on what happens if there are delays due to the epidemic or pandemic on a job site. What happens about the social distancing and so on sites, and obviously bear in mind how that's going to affect your pricing. I was talking to someone in the fire industry recently, and they were explaining what it's like on the site. This was a 33rd floor of a building in Sydney, and they're just talking about that they reckon they're probably only getting 2, maybe 3 hours a day out of some blokes because they're going up and down floors, and they get up to level 33 and the little lift thing, and then realise they've left some specialised piece of equipment down in the truck, and so they've got to go all the way down. And they'll walk down, but they'll never walk up, funnily enough. So the main thing is one of the things we're always trying to encourage clients and members to do is when you get a contract, read it, go through it, identify the clauses which you think are a problem. And then, and some of you do this already, but you should develop it often comes with a contract, but it doesn't always, a thing called a register of contractual concerns. And I think I sent that through to Penny, an example earlier today, and I don't know if you can share it. But in essence, you go through the contract, and in the first left-hand column, here we go. So you see item 2 there is in clauses 5.2 and 5.11. You've identified an issue that you have to provide that amount of security, and this BBB electrical is made up, by the way, but this is based on an actual thing I did do for, I think, an electrician. Saying, well, look, we want this to be changed to not 5% bank guarantees, but 2.5s. And the other thing is that the bank has told us in this case that they want the word unconditional to be removed. So then we write down what we want. So the idea is you put what it is that you have a problem with, why it's a problem, commercial reason, and what you want it changed to. And then the next column over gives in your case, most of you guys, most of the time with the builder an opportunity to reply. They say okay or no, or how about this as a compromise. And then the next column over again is for you to reply to what they put down. And this way we work through each of the issues that we identify in a contract as we go through, and we say, right, this issue, and then we get to a point where we agree or we give up, in which case you just say close, we move on. Because as you know, you won't get everything, but you will actually get, contractors will get a lot more changes to contract if they take this approach, because it shows you're engaging, it shows you're showing the commercial reason you're asking for something. It's not just some bloody lawyer writing saying they want all sorts of complicated changes. Like you see there with that item 9 where it says clause 3A, we want you to remove the last 3 lines. Well, why? This restriction limits us to only be able to make a claim at a time expressly permitted for making a payment claim, and it won't work, and explain why it doesn't work, and then over it goes. Now, in this particular matter, I know for a fact, I think there are, how many are in this thing, Summer? Is there about 30 questions we asked?
In this document?
Yeah. No, there's only 13.
Yeah. Just...
Okay. This one, I know we got every single one of those changed. And so what happened is the client gave me the contract and said, can you do a review? I did a review. I prepared this document for them, gave it to them. They took 2 of them out, so there must have been 2 more than this, and then they submitted this. And that bit down the bottom is really important. You've got to say that. So I strongly encourage all members to use this approach to contracts, and particularly now because your risks are through the roof. And if Steve could actually speak and we could hear him, he'll talk about the risks and some of the problems there. But yeah, so I encourage everyone to do that. If you haven't had us do an advice for you on a contract before, I'd encourage you, this is a good opportunity to start doing it. And then gradually you learn, and you learn what to look for yourself. And then you might only be ringing us about 3 or 4 questions. Anyway, I hope that helps everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Steve, I might try you again. Can we hear you now? Can you hear us? Getting a lot of movement.
Don't think we can hear him. I might ask a question of Ian. Some of the feedback, Ian, that we've been getting from members is concerns around, when they're doing maintenance work and they're going to a home, mum and dad might have lost their job. They might not be able to afford to pay for the plumbing work, but they need to have a new hot water system installed. We have spoken to the government to see if there's any sort of funding for essential services, so that if people did need to get hot water, that there was some sort of funding available to assist. At the moment, there isn't something available for that. Just wondered if you could give any tips on, debt collection, of what processes people could follow if they were having difficulty at this time getting payment from customers.
I think there's a couple of things. Just by way of background, I think most of you probably know, but if you don't, the government, the feds, have changed the normal law so that if you sue somebody, you can still sue people, and you can still do adjudications and so on. And I'll come back to all that in a minute. But if you sue someone and you say they're an individual, we're going to give them a bankruptcy notice, they've normally got 21, 28 days to reply, and if they don't, they're stuffed. You get them made bankrupt. Same with winding up a company. You give them a statutory demand, and they must either challenge that in court, or you can wind them up. The government has said now, if you serve one of those things, it can take, you've got to wait, you've got to give them 6 months to reply. So effectively it's put using those methods to collect your monies on hold. But it's really important that people, firstly, don't get yourself in a contract that doesn't work. Secondly, in that sort of situation you're talking about where it's a domestic customer, they're valued, if they're a long-term customer, you might want to approach and say, look, okay, well, how about I'll do the work for you now and you pay me in installments, and you enter into a formal agreement, which you do by way of a deed. And then so that's important, and that's a legally enforceable document. That way, at least you're doing work which you get paid for down the track. The main thing though is to not let your creditors get out of control, because I know even in our business we're starting to see people just not paying. It's not because they don't like us or don't, whatever it is, they just don't think they've got the money. So keep on top of them. Try not to do work where you're not going to get paid, because that's worse than not having any work. Remember, the adjudication system is still working. There's no delays in that. Strongly encourage you to do that. If if there's a builder who's not paying people, if 3 people get an adjudication decision against the builder and they get registered as a judgment, the builder will lose his license. So they will pay you. So that's for the non-domestic work. For the commercial work, so just encourage you, don't just give up and say I can't do anything about it, because it's a time where it's really important that you keep on top of creditors. And you can use the free letter of demand system through the MPAQ website. That comes out and we'll send out free letters. Have we got Steve back yet?
Yes, I do, Ian. I just could hear that last bit, so we're
there we go.
Right. That's probably a good segue to the trade credit market.
Yeah. Did you want to speak about trade credit insurance?
Yes.
How this works, what impact it'll have on the average contractor, that kind of thing?
Sure. Trade credit is underwritten globally by about 4 insurers. Coface is a French company, Petradius, Euler Hermes, and QBE. a household name in Australia, but as a global player. Around the end of March, QBE made a decision that they would drastically cut back the companies that they provided trade credit to that had a exposure to COVID-19. So basically anybody who was in medical, groceries or transport were pretty much okay, but the rest of the construction market was on the nose. The beginning of April, that set a ripple through the contractors market, because all of a sudden these contractors that were provided with limits by principals and suppliers were then offered nil limits on those businesses. So instead of having the debt on that business underwritten, they were basically converted to a cash-only basis rather than account. So that means that there potentially is a massive credit squeeze on the way. Several weeks later, there was a change of heart, and QBE did a backflip and decided that they would only provide 50% of the previous limits that were provided, which is something, but not the same as what there was previously. And what does all this mean? Well, trade credit is where the insurer provides cover over a book of debtors, and there's generally 3 different types of cover. There's whole of turnover, there's specific account, and there's what they call major basket, which is like your top 10 debtors. There are different trigger points for the pricing, but generally the most popular is whole of account, and that's where the underwriter provides cover for all your debtors up to, say, a shelf of 75 to 80%, and then you take the 90%. There's strict guidelines on the credit control and reporting, and at the end of each month, the client needs to provide a aged debtor list to the underwriter, and they will then provide confirmation that those limits still stand. Whilst you may have an annual policy, these limits are reviewed monthly, and that's where if they see trading patterns where particular buyers may be under payment duress, or there's legal action pending, or there's some sort of pattern in the market where they're not paying their bills, then the underwriter may restrict cover for that particular debtor. this stance taken by QBE was not particularly targeted at any particular contractors, but just really a market change in general, which they believe is coming. In saying that, in our own business, we've seen food manufacturers that have been impacted greatly, but hopefully when the retail restrictions ease, they will bounce back. We haven't seen many downturns in the contracting market. In fact, there's a lot of civil works going on with a lot of other contractors. There's still a lot of maintenance work going on. Hopefully the restrictions will ease soon, and we'll hopefully get back to a little bit more normality.
And I think the question that I asked before we lost you earlier was around the likeliness of some of the general insurance policies like management liability held by the average contractor, and whether they assist with issues that are arising out of COVID-19. Do you have any thoughts
We
on
are
that?
probably seeing, yes, thanks, Summer. We're probably seeing two areas that are causing concern as emerging claim trends, and that's around the employment practices aspect with unfair dismissals, harassment, and other employment-related matters. We're anticipating there'll be an increase in mental anguish and injury claims arising from employers expecting staff to operate in environments that are considered unsafe or with no social distancing aspects or not enough PPE. And it also may translate into staff who are non-performers who may be let go, looking for alternate ways to make claims against the employer. We're anticipating an increase in crime with theft of materials from contractors, theft of funds, and also databases, which is the big increase with cyber aspects of crime, which it could be private information or company information. Whilst the management liability policy you mentioned doesn't cover a full cyber aspect, it will cover a full amount of privacy issues. But if you're looking for a full cyber cover, then they will cover the crisis containment, it'll cover damage to your database, and also cover the liability that you might have to your people that have been affected. But they're really the two main issues out of your management liability will be crime and the EPL related matters.
And just in relation to, I know you just mentioned some of them with the claims and that kind of thing, with the unfair dismissal, everything like that, but do you know of any of the other trends that are being seen at the moment in the insurance industry in regards to claims, that kind of thing?
We probably will see an upswing in PI related matters or professional indemnity related matters, where because of restrictions with the virus is going to cause other hazards that might give rise to claims. And an example in that Fin Review article that I mentioned that was in the paper yesterday, there is a growing trend for contractors on sites to send photographs of work for sign-off, which is ideal because as the contractors will attest to, there's always something that may be missed with a photograph. So we're anticipating there may be some quality control aspects as well, public liability claims and PI claims.
And I suppose just last question, do you think it's going to be harder to obtain insurance in the future?
For me?
Yeah, sorry.
For those companies that are well managed, who do have a risk management process and do demonstrate a quality framework, and what I mean by that is they do have some policies and procedures in place, and without pumping up your tyres too much, I'm saying that being a member of someone like the MPAQ in this environment and the environment going forward is extremely important. That the contractors do have access to professional assistance and technical advice that the association can provide, and that'll just translate to lesser claims and exposures in the future, and underwriters are looking at those types of businesses that are well managed and have a lesser claims frequency. You'll find that businesses that do have a higher claims frequency in the future either simply won't be able to get cover, or their pricing will be out of the ballpark.
Cool. Yeah, we haven't had any questions come in just yet, but if anybody does have any questions, definitely pop those in the chat now. We'd be obviously happy to pass those on to Ian and Steve. But I suppose just might go to you, Ian, first. Do you have any final comments about what's been going on, about contracts, all that kind of thing?
I mean, it might sound like a bit of a broken record, but you couldn't stress enough at the moment in particular to not sign contracts without knowing what's in them, to not try and get rid of crappy clauses that are in contracts, and to negotiate in good faith to try and get proper terms and conditions where there are some things that are just not acceptable. And the classic is the one Steve will see as much as I do, he probably sees it more than I do, is contracts which have clauses about the insurances you must cover and the risks that you must cover with insurance, but you just can't get insurance for it. Steve, you no doubt see that all the time, I guess.
Yes, I do, Ian. In fact, that's a very good point. If there's ever a time to obtain advice on insurance and legal advice in entering into contracts, now is the time. As you would have alluded to before about the liquidated damages and force majeure and extension of time provisions, there really needs to be a more thorough risk assessment process in contracts to understand what the exposures are, and also supply chains. Supply chain sustainability is going to be key in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So that I totally endorse what Steve's saying there. It's just more important than ever. It's always been important, but it's much more important now, because as the financial pressure comes on those above you in the contractual chain, they're going to be, the temptation to be nastier to you will be very strong. One thing that I really would encourage is something that's a bit unusual in building construction, but is collaboration. And over the years, what I've seen is the contractors who usually do the best are those that maintain excellent relationships with their clients, and are upfront when there's a problem, being upfront with them, without exposing yourselves to liability. Be upfront. So look, we're anticipating having this problem. How can we together deal with this? Now, I'm hopeful there will be more collaboration as we move forward. That's actually, one of my partners put that in an article just recently. So contracts, really important. Making sure you follow the procedures in the contract. If you're trying to get an extension of time, check that whatever the notice you have to give them, whatever you have to specify, you specify. Whatever time frame you must do it within, you comply with the time frames. Follow the contract. It is your rules. You need to follow it. If you don't, they'll simply refuse the extension of time. So keep on top of your paperwork. Again, more important than ever. And with your debtors, don't let people get away with it. Remember that ultimately, particularly someone who's above you that's got a QBCC license, if they get judgments against them, they will pay because they will lose their license. So they're probably the main tips.
Cool. We did just get a question in for you as well, Ian. Not so much a question, more just a comment. So Sonia just said that they're currently updating their trading terms and conditions. They have them drafted, and wondering if that's something that Cornwalls can review for them.
Sure, it's Sonia. That more than happy to do that. We do this every day of the week, basically. And as I was saying, even the contracts which we've drafted, we need to change now because we didn't have anything about pandemics and epidemics in them. So there's a few things there that we'll be updating. We are about to go through and update MPAQ's contracts as well. So, Sonia, if you want to drop that on an email to me, I think you've got my email address. I think i.heathwood@cornwallsqld.com.au. Just send it through and have a squiz.
Cool. And Steve, did you have any final comments?
No, just other than what I said before about having the quality framework in place and becoming or being a member of the MPAQ is very important. Having your having your insurance aspects in contracts reviewed by your broker is very important, so you can understand what maybe uninsured risk, or you're going in with your eyes wide open into contracts knowing that there may be some uninsured exposures that you can manage, and have the appropriate subcontractor arrangements in place. So at least that if there is a loss, there is a line of, or some sort of conduit of recovery or from subrogation, so that you're not stuck with the claim eventually that's going to impact your claims history and your premium.
And Penny, did you have any final thoughts or any updates that you wanted to provide to everybody, seeing as we've got a bit of time here?
Yeah, sure, Ian. I was just going to ask also, just in regards to, you know, obviously how important it is to actually have a contract. And I think a lot of people perhaps doing maintenance type work don't implement contracts on a day-to-day basis. And obviously there's repeat customers or repeat clients that they have good relationships with that they do work for all of the time. Just wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit around the importance of having a contract and what's, you know, the different types of contracts that are available in that space.
Okay, if we could just look at that maintenance issue, classic example of the problems that you get for not having a contract is, what exactly are you supposed to be doing and what are you not required to do? If you don't have a contract, there's no limit on what you might be, what they might think you're required to do, and because everyone's operating on what's implied terms, that is, you know, do we have to clean the Watsit as well, or not? And if you don't, it just means you're signing yourself. Well, you're not signing up. You're proceeding without any limit to your potential liability, and that dramatically increases the likelihood of a fight and dispute about what you are supposed to do and not do. It probably puts at risk your insurance position because you're doing who really knows what, and you will or won't be covered by insurance depending on what it is you're supposed to be doing. It's just a very unnecessary risk to take. So in terms of contracts, most, say, plumbers who are doing a little bit of domestic, mostly commercial, which consists of some construction and also maintenance work, you really need contracts which are tailored for them. To do domestic work in Queensland, there are certain things that must be in the contract, otherwise it's unlawful. And also it's unlawful not to have a written contract for a start. So you need to have a contract which complies with the requirements of the domestic provisions in the QVCC Act. You know, we've drafted one. I'm actually literally doing one today. But that's a standard thing. You need to follow the format and you need to do all the things that it says you have to do in the warning statement that comes with it. The second thing, for maintenance work, there are slightly different issues which you need to cover off on in terms of risk management for a maintenance contract than there is for a construction contract. So normally what I would suggest to people is that they have a contract which tries to cover both of those, and if not, they have separate contracts to deal with those separate types of work. Then the most important thing is this, that where you have the opportunity to set the terms and conditions by using your own contract. So for example, someone just says, look, can you have a look at this and give us a price? You can set up your terms and conditions so that are favorable on your side, not just have no terms or not just accept what you're given. And there's ways I can teach people how to do that. And we've set all those sort of procedures up so that you've got your risk, you're minimizing your risk, and you're managing a known risk rather than unknown risks. And then secondly, in terms of your subcontractors underneath you, that's a lot of people don't document them, and you see a lot of fights between subcontractors and subcontractors because there's no document. There's no, again, uncertainty as to what they are and are not responsible for. You need to be able to limit the amount of risk you're getting shoved on you from the top, and you need to be able to push some risks down to the person below you and make sure you just manage the bit in the middle. It's really important. No contract is just crazy stuff.
Yeah, no, thanks.
And
Ian.
illegal.
Yeah, and so you talked also before about the debt collection and what the process is if you're struggling to get payment. You also talked about from a builder's perspective. So is that through the money's owed complaint section on the QBCC website before you go through to adjudication?
Personally, the members have probably got better feedback than I have how the QBCC is or is not actually doing things about that, because we obviously don't get involved in that aspect. But I would follow all possible opportunities. I mean, I would be using the free letter of demand process first, if that's an early stage. I mean, obviously, if there's a big Barney on the job, they're not going to respond to a letter of demand. I would be using the QBCC service, and I would be getting set up to make sure your invoice qualifies as a payment claim under the Act, and that you comply. The most important thing here is having a relevant reference date, which is a whole nother conversation, and making sure that your invoice qualifies as a payment claim, that you deliver it to them, and then they've only got the 10 business days to either pay you in full or alternatively give you a payment schedule, which is a document saying why they're only going to pay you a certain amount. And then you can have a fight about the bit that they're not going to pay. And if they don't pay the bit they say they're going to pay, you can get a judgment against them. So it's really important that people understand that how that payment claim system operates. And fortunately actually, but there's going to be more changes to it very shortly. And I can tell you guys the changes which they're going to bring in now are the best. And we will genuinely have the best system in the country by quite a long way. So it's going to be a good move. And Penny's Mob, the MPAQ, have done their bit, trying to make sure that the government doesn't do the silly things they were contemplating and did the right things. And they've been really successful in lobbying the minister.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. And then just a question for Steve. Steve, I get a lot of calls from members complaining about homeowners trying to undertake their own plumbing work. And yes. I suppose the message out to consumers is around that if they were to undertake work on their own home, that they wouldn't be covered by their own insurance policy if something went wrong. I was just wondering if maybe you could make a comment on that.
That's a very valid point, Penny. Domestic insurers will look to avoid a claim under a contract if the appropriate work hasn't been undertaken by a licensed contractor, if it has to be duly licensed. So aspects such as what you're talking about, grey water, wastewater, that type of thing, it's extremely important that the homeowners seek work to be done by a licensed contractor, as it well could emanate in an uninsured claim. We are seeing an increase in insurers wanting to move away from water damage in high-rise buildings in strata. I can tell you that I would believe in the current environment that an insurer would probably seek to recover from a party who had undertaken illegal work that had damaged other unit holders. I could see that happening quite easily.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Steve. So a really important message that we need to help get out there a bit more, I think, to consumers. Something that we'll be focused on as well, especially during the recovery stage.
That's right. Yeah.
Penny, if I might indulge just by telling a little story. This is years ago. A friend of mine lived in Iran, and he went to his unit and went and had a bath. And then he pulled the plug on the bath, and there's screaming and banging on his door started. So he put a towel around and he went out, and the man's go off his nut in Iranian or whatever they speak, and they couldn't understand. So what happened? This is a new unit. So he thought there was a bit strange when he walked up the first flight of stairs, and the ceiling was like about 15 foot high. And then he turned the steps to go up the next one, and the ceiling was about 5'8". So they built it rather funny. So he gets in there, and what happens when he pulled the plug, the water just ran into the unit down below. There's no drainage, no pipes, nothing.
Oh dear.
So hopefully we don't have that here in Queensland. But yeah, and I just emphasise that one thing, as Steve's saying, it's also a breach of the QBCC Act for people to do unlicensed work, and they will prosecute them. Seen it plenty of times.
Cool. Anything else you wanted to add, Penny? All good for you?
Probably just the last point was we sent out a survey out to members yesterday just in regards to our efforts around stimulus and what that looks like with the recovery, and if anybody has any suggested ideas on what we're going to lobby government. We've obviously been already having initial conversations. We just want to formalise those as we speak, similar to when the GFC was on and there was a stimulus package released after that. That's really our focus now in the recovery phase, to help businesses through this difficult time, because some of our members haven't been impacted too much at the moment, but concerns around the forward work and the pipeline of work coming through as well. So any information or feedback, please send that through and we'll take it on board. But everybody's been pretty quiet today on the questions, Summer. This is unusual.
Yeah.
Normally we have so many questions.
Yeah, you must have answered everything. We'll put the link to that survey in the thank you email that everybody gets as well. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And just thank you to Cornwalls and obviously to Comsure as well. We both have partnerships with both organisations, and we obviously very much appreciate and value the time that they've provided today too.
My pleasure.
And while we'll just wait and see if any final questions come through, but I might just bring up the slides again. So just to talk a little bit about what else MPAQ are doing. So so we are still continuing to do our regular email updates. They're not daily anymore, just because we know that there's a lot of information gone out and the information has slowed down a little bit. So our COVID-19 updates, they are still going to be coming out when important info comes out, but not every day, just so you're not bombarded. We have had a really great response to our closed Facebook group that we set up specifically for members. So if you haven't joined just yet, the link is there on the screen for you. Just make sure you answer the questions when you request to join, because that's the way that we're vetting who are members and who aren't. And then the next thing is we have another webinar coming up next Wednesday. This one's with another corporate partner of ours, Podium, so Taylor from Podium. We're going to be speaking about tips to keep business coming in when people aren't going out. So they deal a lot with Google search reviews, all that kind of thing. So, and staying connected to customers without actually being face-to-face with them. So that'll be a really good webinar. If you want to jump onto that one, you can find the link to register on our website on the events page. And just double checking the chat, doesn't look like any others have come in, so we might wrap things up. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Ian and Steve for being here today. Thank you for Penny for jumping on as well. We hope you've all gotten some useful information and guidance from today. If you do have any questions following on from this, if you think of anything later when we send out the thank you email, just respond to that and we'll get those over to Ian and Steve to answer. But yeah, that's about it for today. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.